Thanks for coming, everybody. For braving the cold. Welcome. The SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice of the University of San Francisco acknowledges our presence on the unceded land of the indigenous Ohlone communities and pays our respects to these traditional caretakers and elders, past, present, and emerging. It is our intention that this acknowledgement plays a role, however infinitesimal, in a much larger process of confronting the past in order to create a not yet realized future rooted in justice. So welcome to the SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice's third. It's our third event of the fall 2022 semester. Now it's on. Welcome to the third event of the fall 2022 semester.
Sorry.
That was my fault.
My name is Oren Kroll-Zeldin, and I'm proud to be a faculty member and the assistant director of this program. Before introducing tonight's keynote speaker, let me tell you a little bit about the University of San Francisco, as well as our extraordinary Jewish Studies and Social Justice program. Founded in 1855, U.S. of San Francisco's first university, a premier Jesuit Catholic school. In 1977, we became the first Catholic institution in the world to establish a Jewish Studies program. Some 30 years later, in 2008, we became the first university of any kind, Catholic and otherwise, to have an academic program formally linking Jewish studies and social justice. And then, in 2019, we added yet another first to our renowned history by forming a new position on campus, that of Rabbi in Residence. With the hiring of Rabbi Camille Shira Angel, we became the first Catholic school with a queer Rabbi in Residence in history. Of the world, history of the world, of the universe. Through the SWIG JSSJ program, we believe that education is the best long-term way to create systemic change. Whether one has the time to take a semester-long course or a mere few hours to hear from a single speaker, education is fundamental to making our world better, paramount in shining the spotlight on the margins, on oppressed communities who are mistreated merely because of their race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or another social identity altogether. This is our third event, but let me briefly tell you about a few other Jewish Studies and Social Justice program events that we're putting on this semester. So as you know, or maybe you don't know, this is the week of Sukkot, which is why we are in this temporary hut structure called a Sukkah. It's freezing. Sukkah is supposed to be a shelter, so hopefully this shelters us a little bit from the bitter cold. And during this holiday, we build these temporary dwellings to help remind us, among other things, of the transient nature of life. Many of these dwellings, including the one we build annually on campus, are built structurally to embody openness, both a literal and spiritual idea. We have two other events that I want to tell you about. One is this week and one is in November. So tomorrow evening, Friday, October 14th, from 5 to 7, we will have a Friday night or Shabbat dinner, a dinner for the Jewish Sabbath with speakers, food, music, and community, an event that we're putting on in partnership with Value Culture. Everyone is welcome, regardless of whether or not you identify as Jewish. Everyone is welcome. And then our final event of the semester will be held on Wednesday, November 16th, from 6:30 to 8 p.m. inside, don't worry, inside in Fromm Hall, where we will host scholar Mira Amiras, the creator of Malka's Notebook, a graphic novel about and love letter to the Hebrew alphabet. If you'd like to learn more about these events or to sign up for our monthly newsletter, there's a sign-up sheet right outside of the Sukkah. And if you sign up, you'll get our once-a-month newsletter with information of all of these and other events. As for tonight's event, one of the topics we focus our JSSJ events on is the diversity of Jewish identities. Since we relaunched as the Jewish Studies and Social Justice program in 2008, we have brought unique Jewish voices to campus in an attempt to give such individuals a larger platform to share themselves and their work with others. Tonight's speaker is one such individual. Tatiana Luboviski-Acosta is a queer, anarchist, Jewish Nicaragüense artist, poet, and sexual health educator from the lands of the Tongva people, who now lives in Yelamu, Ramaytush Ohlone territory. Tatiana Luboviski-Acosta's work attempts, as fellow poet Lauren Levin writes, to include direct revolutionary action up to and including revolutionary violence as part of a continuum of care, and their use of this redefinition of care work to rethink gendered paradigms. They are the author of The Easy Body, published in 2017 by Timeless Infinite Light, a book-length poem that grew out of their research on the role of reproductive labor in Latin American revolutionary movements, their own matrilineal history, and their experiences navigating reproductive health care in the United States as a poor, queer person of... comedy and color. Their second book of poetry, La Movida, published this year, 2022, by Nightboat Books, can be described as a collection of radical anti-fascist love poems. Tatiana's writing has appeared in Wolfman New Life Quarterly, the Anarchist Review of Books, SFMOMA Open Space, on the 8th floor of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art parking garage, and has been translated into French and Spanish. Their expanded practice, which extends into performance, drawing, sculpture, photography, and video, has been shown and performed in places such as the Los Angeles River and in galleries, punk houses, and micro cinemas across Turtle Island. Tonight, Tatiana will share some of their powerful work with us, and immediately thereafter, we will have time for all of you here to engage in a question and answer with Tatiana. So please join me in welcoming Tatiana to the University of San Francisco.
I'm going to show a video first. Is that okay with y'all? I think so, yeah. I think it turned off on us. Bear with us. And then we're going to go back a bit. There we go. What's up? And restart it. Okay. Hit play.
Hi, good evening. My hands tend to freeze right before I read, which is why I stepped out. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you. I'm going to read some poems for you. Oh, no. Yeah, we should just turn it off. Yeah. Oh, God, I just saw myself. All right. This is a poem called Agon. Once, while on a coke binge and away from my mother, my father drove his car across the sand and into the Pacific Ocean. Before doing that, he had given away all of his possessions and eaten a steak dinner. He survived. And then he was able to torture us with his aristocratic aesthetic drama for years to come. You can take a Pisces to water, and all it will do is challenge them to cry more than the sky. I say this with admiration. How would it serve me to make this up? Like my father, I sometimes threaten to succumb to wounds and don the trappings of desires disguised as needs. You may know them. The sensible shoe, the classical beauty, the manicured hand offered in neoliberal compromise. I once told Conrad about how I successfully destroy my attraction to strangers. I imagine them standing above me as I lay prone before them in their bed, watching them as they try to get themselves hard and or wet. Then I imagine their sheets, the hovering echo of their mother, the amount of humidity in their bedroom. If they put music on, how their underwear tucks in and around their ass, and usually around this time, I've lost all interest in them. That is so Virgo of you, Conrad said admiringly. That is 1,000% Virgo. Virgo could be my gender or it could be my sexuality. Virgo and narrative lust, Virgo and high fantasy, Virgo and unhappy ending. I don't know what I like more, the desire or the agonizing pleasure of self-torture. I like girls, but girls don't seem to like me in that way at least. I love women and I love men, just as I love all of God's creatures, but that doesn't mean that I want to fuck them or be fucked by them. Hotly spayed virgin and heat that I am, I don't think that I have a gender, but I can now certainly have an orgasm. I orgasmed on my way to the slaughterhouse. I orgasmed on the kill floor. Now, I wouldn't say that the struggle is between masculine and feminine. There's nothing that I'm attracted to, I assure you. I pluck the sinew and hold the cup marked by my lipstick to the cloud's mouth, and I acquire the fear that I don't hear the affect because I have the affect. I would say that the struggle is between decidedly unmasculine and afeminine. The struggle is between indecision and not caring. Like all good poor people and aristocrats, I know how to have a good time. Why I refuse to is my own problem. Like all good leftists of a certain region, I have never read Marx or the Bible. I know the gossip well enough to kneel and resist. For example, or perhaps for instance, I was content enough to be a corpse eater among the lotus eaters, and then a lotus eater among the petroluses. And now I'm a petroluse among the corpse eaters. Got cold. How's everyone doing? Good? Yeah? Cool? Tough crowd. No. If you'd like to come in, you can come in. There's some seats available. Yeah, don't worry. Cool. Who here has ever listened to Neil Young? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to preface this by saying this poem has nothing to do with Hanukkah or life on the res. But it was Christmas, and I asked my uncle, my father's brother, what kind of holiday movie he would make if he ever could make one. And he told me that it would be fry bread for Hanukkah. And I asked him, okay, that's interesting. And he was like, yeah, it'd be great. It would star Buffy St. Marie as the matriarch and Neil Young as the cantankerous father, and they live on the res, and their children are coming home for Hanukkah. And I was really confused, and I was like, why Neil Young? And he was like, oh, because he's Jewish and indigenous. Like, come on. I had to break a 70-year-old man's heart and tell him that neither of those things was true. This poem takes its title from a Neil Young song off the album Zuma. And it's not about my uncle, and it's not about Hanukkah, and it's not about life on the res, but it is about my father. Saw you in my nightmares, see you in my dreams. If you try to cross a river wearing a veil of concrete and glass, how long will it be before the bomb goes off? If you wander the fermented fields of soap, blindfolded and with a daisy in the barrel of your rifle, how long will it be until you're aiming at yourself? Tell me, how many hands did you have to hold when you leaned forward to unlock that door? My friend who died 1,000 deaths, it takes a true coward to resist while dancing in the dark. Is anyone here into Pasolini? I know you are. It's my friend Dickie. Pasolini is really cool. There's a really cool Coil song about him, too, if you're into Coil. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah, okay, Dickie, thank you, yes. Anyone here listen to Throbbing Gristle? Okay, Dickie, keep your hand up. You guys haven't lived. Come on, get into industrial music. It's very freeing. This poem is called Quiver with Joy. I was 17 when my father died, freeing me to dive into the earth. I ate the flesh, and I opened my legs, and I bled into the dawn. Sleeping amongst the pigs in their shit was grander than any homecoming could be. In respect to cancer. I once wrote a poem with a line about mothers who demand respect because they are mothers. Why, I couldn't tell you, either about their demands or my intentions. Now I realize there are women who are sure that they are women. I like the moon all right, but I'm here, sucking clay and pressing the subtle breath of the earth between my thighs, but only chastely so. I swim in you, there are no waves. I'm not exactly giving forth, but I'm also not buying what you're selling. The tide went so far out, the life exposed lay upon me so expectantly, gelatinous jewels unsuspecting of your wrath. I surprised myself by knowing that it was time to run. Vagabunda. Dear Mama, this binary is killing me. Happiness. Just because I did it today doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be done again and again and again and again. Was I my hands? Was I my work? Was I your home? In my time at the bottom, in my time standing, waiting on the bouncy rot, drowning while being masculine in one language, dying while being feminine in another, dead while neutral in this one. Imagine if your life was as long as a lake's. You still won't live as long as me. Cut me and don't find the yellow flesh of a plum. Okay. I can't believe you guys have never listened to Throbbing Gristle. It's embarrassing. Okay. This poem's called Way. Like I said, person of comedy. Okay, Way. Galeano writes that after Che's assassination, novias esqueletos all over Argentina emerged. My mom says, you know, Che's first wife was an Acosta, a matrilineal one at that. Never mind that Hilda Gadea was Peruvian, not from Tucumán, or that my mom was a patrilineal one, or that the Acostas and my mother were anarchists. This is the same woman who told my father that naming their child Che was the equivalent of naming their kid Way, or dude. Fu imagínate, me being named Way. Like after a useless death, becoming the Santo Noviekis of anyone that ever looked both ways before crossing Figueroa to get to the nail salon on the other side, thinking sexy thoughts against gang injunctions or gentrification, who knew the taste of zucchini fries, whoever lit a fire in the middle of the street as a distraction, kissing the inside of their mask while remembering the soft bottom of the Glendale Narrows against the tips of their fingers. Yet only you could say, "Oh yeah, way." They once breathed into my neck, sucked the hot Cheeto dust off my fingers, and called their love for me the terrain to which the ordinary descend, and where their heart was trapped, and then shotgunned a kiss. That fool. Way. Fuck them. So I was named after my mom's best friend, but she couldn't tell me that for some reason. She just insisted for years that I was named after a telenovela character, and it's traditional to name a kid after someone who just passed away. And my mother's friend was murdered by the Contras pretty soon before my mom had found out that she was pregnant with me. But she just could not tell me this. So anyway, I guess this is kind of about that. Icon bound with tocayo. Was she named after the true image, telenovela star turned murdered friend, or boarding school lesbian turned revolutionary buried in the river, or ice queen turned headless virgin? Was the true image named after her? And this poem is called Tatiana Luboviski-Acosta. I want the freedom to make art about nothing in particular. Nothing is stopping me, nothing except for you. Ándale, muchachita vaya. Can't you pronounce yourself in the words they gave you? At some point, we're all going to have to face that a lot of our ancestors were just regular, not healers or curanderas or warriors, whatever we want to claim. They were regular people. Maybe they believed, maybe they didn't. Maybe they spoke out and organized against that state. Maybe they're cringing and angry at us for learning Nawa. I know way, way back mine probably are. But closer, they spoke with double tongues. Actually, now they do too. Low and deep, as if to be able to float above your hearing. You know, sometimes I like to jump that fence back and forth. When my hair is parted in the middle, I'm a boy. When my hair is parted on the side, I'm a girl. On Fridays, we eat filet-o-fish for lunch, and we light 2 candles at dinner. If you can't already tell, my entire last name is a narrative of abandonment. It could have been worse. I could have been that deep breath, that striking lingual flirtation before the objection. Slayer. I like the thought of being denied the new life before I've even finished the old life. Hand over heart, head over heels, a season in purgatory, a year in the dark, within the circle, yet beyond the core. House to house, over doorways, and at the head of the table, light the candles, lay down the salt. I'll go ahead and keep what's mine, a glint of lead heavy in its years of denial, desperately wanting to melt. Y'all doing okay? It's cold, I know. Okay. This poem is called Memory of Water. You may recognize it. There has got to be a name for that condition of destruction in which an object becomes more fragile the more it is admired. It's the early violence that I'm glad to miss. To imagine a string pulling the top of my head up and in line with my leg. A lovely smile of abjection takes the strain. A wretched joke of community, a ceremonial shard, a cyclical cut, a pose of tight thighs bleeding forever. I'd been neglected to have been told of a snake below my belly that communes with the moon and the waves. It sheds its skin, it eats its tail, it knows too much about me. How are we on time? Okay, yeah. All right. Song Against the Wounded Hand. The dancing water replaced my tongue with a knife. I watched you look past me when you told me you loved me. Behind the mirror were the stars, and among the waxing and waning head of the disrespectful daughter, they stood shining. As the hours passed, they folded into themselves, one by one, until there was darkness. I stopped wearing the woven universe when my face stopped being a map, or rather, when the map began to lead to a ruin. In the town of liars and poets, the tumbleweeds having been replaced by the rotting silk garments in the colonial style, I was torn to pieces by the wild dogs, yet stayed with you. My ribs became your house, you wove my hair to carry water, and you used my tears to adorn yourself. Clapstick, plastic bags surfing the waves, eternal fart over the ocean, acorn mush cooking in asphalt dimple, a dancing ruby false in a paper cup, a holy song sang by the willow as it scraped. Your dress of cormorant feathers glances green like the ocean. But what good is the new life? Our souls were found, then saved by a stranger god, whose children went ahead and murdered us anyway with green corn. Only say the word, and I shall be healed. My voice now carries the lash of a law that I do not respect. Bring me the head of Junipero Serra on a platter of tar and gold, and your heart roasted in the lap of a chacmul. I declare war on a war that I have inherited. Does anyone know what today is? Like in the calendar, in the scheme of the world? So today is the 530th anniversary of Christopher Columbus landing in what is now called Hispaniola, or Dominican Republic. And with it, you know, I always joke that like 1492 is like the year that my ancestors just met an incredible amount of bullshit, because it was when the invasion happened here in Turtle Island, and it's also when my other ancestors were expelled from Spain. So today is the anniversary of 530 years of absolute fucking violent bullshit. This poem is called Llorona. Trust me, this wail is stronger than concrete, it's louder than rust. It is crueler than your lash and your God, and will brand you deeper than any pox. It will turn back the moon 529 years, 530 years. It will slit your throat. It will sink your ships, killer. The oranges, the olives, the grapes will rot, and the wildfires will rule, and how I will rise, how my tears will bleed, and how my children will emerge from mined harbors. I am amused that you expected me to swallow the eventual spiritual murder of my children by your hand, tie the rope myself, and hand it over to you. Trust me, killer, this whale will drown you too. Okay. The process. We didn't trust the process during our struggle for and defense of memory. They respected our guns, but not us. Instead, we let the lakes and the land speak for us, their possible song commandeering the waves through the radio equipment hidden in the plaster bodies of virgins and saints, reminding us of a possible beauty beyond the crimes against our flesh. We refused to be reorganized, so their circular talk tried to cut us down. Instead, we sang our floating tongues back in time, back to those who came before, whose resistance and survival made us possible. Bellies of virgins and saints echoed with static. It isn't violence, the volcano interrupted, to turn sugarcane into a weapon. It's only self-defense, an act of undying love. Let's go ahead, disorganize ourselves towards that possible beauty, we said. Are we good? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to read one more poem, and then we can talk, I suppose. Love poem. I, an intellectual, once loved someone pure of heart, who let their car get towed away. The vein that connects my heart to my mouth is a ribbon tied around a bomb. I was joking when I said that I knew how to read. My vote was cast for kissing by the light of a cop car on fire, My mother tells me that a garden is a prison. She was beautiful, with a face like a melting candle, and I'm sure well-loved and well-documented. I know my father had nightmares of limbs of soap hidden among tall grasses. There's carnage in this empty lot. I cemented my banks against the burning plain and drank the wine that flowed from the wounded hand. All day and all night in complicated love. I loved someone who loved the spirit in the sky, so I tried to fall in love with the sky. Thank you. Cool.
We need to use this mic?
We can, but
We have lots of time. Here. Thank you, Tatiana. Your words are beautiful. Your imagery very powerful and poignant. We have a lot of time. We can have a conversation. We have a mic that we can pass around if you have questions, or maybe not that we could pass around, maybe that you could come up here. And ideally, you will actually ask the question into the microphone so that we could pick it up for the video and for anyone who's at home right now. I'd like to actually ask a question first, which is you shared a lot about your family. Your poetry speaks about yourself and your parents and your deep history, and you mentioned, I think your words describing 1492 are beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
And I wonder if you could share a little bit about your history, your family's history, how you came to be you, and how that emerges in your poetry. Yeah.
Okay. I'll try. Oh my God. Well, Well, okay. My parents met in the 80s, and they met in Los Angeles. And my mother was, she worked in the Central American Solidarity Movement. She was Central American. And she met my father, who was a Jewish lawyer. And I don't know if you know this, but there's a lot of Latinx kids who's have like Latina legal secretary moms and like Jewish lawyer dads in Los Angeles. And my father wasn't around when I was a kid. And for the most part, my mother was traveling around a lot. But when I was 17, my father passed away after I got to know him kind of briefly. And my mom also had what could only really be described as like a mental breakdown. So I feel like the past 15 or so years, I've kind of been recovering from those two things and getting to know my family almost through like world history in a weird way, and sort of contextualizing them and their experiences and also their love story a little bit. Because that is something that I actually can very proudly say is that my parents did love each other. But yeah, I think like if there were two things that really that happened before I was born in the 20th century that have shaped me into the person that I am, because of how they shaped my parents. One would be the Contra War and the Nicaraguan Revolution. And the other one would be classic rock. Seriously. And its effect on both of them. And how those two things are actually very intrinsically braided. And there's a lot of that in the book. It's just, you kind of have to excavate it a little bit. But yeah, so my parents are from Los Angeles. and they had me, and I have two sisters, both of whom are a lot older than I am. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say, because I feel like it's something that's just always in my work and present in my work, that to have to like answer a question right away, it would just be, I'm the youngest child of two totally insane and brilliant people, one of whom has passed away. Yeah.
Got questions? Got questions? We've got answers.
Maybe. I can't guarantee answers. Yeah. Okay.
What's your writing process? I know, some poets or artists that I've spoken to
Yeah.
talk about it channeling through them, and maybe if you could speak to that a little.
Yeah, I think the channeling part is definitely really big for me, for sure. I have a really strong reading practice. Like, I call it a reading practice, because I read very intentionally, and I read and I take notes. And a lot of my writing does emerge from research that I do. And yeah, so basically, I spend a lot of time reading and a lot of time taking notes. And I don't ever really just sit down and say, today I'm going to write a poem. It kind of just emerges out of me. But usually after months of kind of synthesizing from a lot of outside material. So, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, you gotta come up here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks. Hi there.
Hi.
My name is Jada. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Jada. Hi.
Hi. So my question is, why poetry as opposed to other artful expressions like maybe painting or songwriting or something like that? What made you choose poetry as an expression of your inner thoughts and your life and things like that?
Good question. Poetry chose me by virtue of being Nicaraguan. Sorry, that's a joke. Yeah. Yeah, no, poetry chose me, but also I do other things, too. I am a visual artist, and I make a lot of things, and I do sometimes work with sound. But it seems that poetry has been the thing that people like the most of mine. I've worked like as an artist for like 15 years, and it's just weird. I guess like I started writing poetry, and then people liked it, whereas with my visual art, I don't know if people really ever liked it. So yeah, some objections in the in the crowd. But yeah, no, I am a visual artist, and actually I have some copies of my books. If you want one, come and see me. And they all have my visual art inside of them. So, but yeah, I think that actually poetry is the one that, okay, so sometimes I play a game with myself, which I like to call ESL or LSD. And it's basically, if I encounter a piece of language that I can't understand or make heads of tails out of, I immediately think, like sometimes I'll read words that are in English, and I'll read them in Spanish and be like, that makes no sense. Like, what is that word? And, or sometimes, because when I was younger, I did do a lot of LSD. I feel like my relationship to language is really almost kind of perverted, in that things shift constantly, like their meanings can shift. So I think poetry is the thing that I do have the most fun with. It's not like I'm not like an agonized, tortured soul of a poet. I'm more of like a very playful kind of coyote trickster type of poet. Does that answer your question? Cool. Yeah. Ask me anything. Can ask me about metal music. Yeah, go ahead. So Hi.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Claire.
Hi, Claire.
Nice to meet you. So you spoke about speaking both Spanish and English. How does like holding those two languages in your mind as you write, because poetry is a lot about like sound and in the way that words feel in your body. How does having a command of two different languages impact your writings? And do you sometimes write? Does like a poem come to you in one language and then you translate it into another? Like, how does that impact your craft?
Great question. I do not have a command of either language. I assure you, I do not have a command of either language. And I think that a lot of my poetry does kind of emerge from that tension between the two. I have what I think a lot of people who grew up on this side have, which is sort of like this ni de aquí ni de allá sort of sensation, where when I speak English, I feel like I'm doing something really weird and wrong. And when I speak Spanish, I'm like very self-conscious and very formal. And I'm not a poet in Spanish. I'm like a very respectful youngest child in Spanish. But I do, like, things do come to me in both languages, and I try not to translate, largely because I think that the weight and the meaning and the presence and the feeling and the sound is completely altered when things are translated. Like, there are a lot of writers that, like, for instance, like one of my favorite writers, Valeria Luiselli, is Mexican, incredible fiction writer. I recently found out that when her work is translated, it's actually not, like, it's a completely different thing in Spanish, and then she reconstructs something alongside the translator in English, which I think is actually, like, how it should be. But yeah, Spanish isn't, I don't consider Spanish my ancestral language, and I think that, and I don't consider English like I mean, they're both like colonizer languages, right? And like, so there's like a whole school of thought around like perverting the two also is like as a form of like decolonial praxis. And there are members of my family and recent ancestors who still spoke like our ancestral indigenous languages. And yeah, so I wish, like, I feel like those two languages are almost like placeholders for, for Quechua and for Nahua and for Ladino. Ladino I do consider to be an ancestral language that I don't know. But yeah, does that answer your question? I'm going to just keep asking that because sometimes I just go to outer space. Remember, ESL, LSD. Just remember that. Cool. Any other questions? Oh, yes. Okay.
Okay, hello, my name is Kenna. It's so nice to meet you.
Hi, Kenna. Very nice to meet you as well.
So I connected a lot with your words and like from what I've read from your work, and I'm just really, really curious if the idea or concept of femininity has any impact or doesn't have any impact on your work, and I'm wondering how so.
Oh, my God. Yes, it does. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, yes. Short answer, yes, it does. That being asked, what is femininity and like what is masculinity? Like, how are those manifested, and like what does that mean? And like there's a line in that poem that I read that I named after myself about how if I like part my hair one way, I'm a boy, and if I part my hair another way, I'm a girl. Which is also like me talking about, being both Jewish and like Catholic in a weird, fucked up way. So, right. But yeah, I mean, a lot of my work does kind of touch on that and like how being presented, like how I present, but then how to me, like my presentation has nothing to do with who I am necessarily either. So yeah, it's in my work. It's very present. It's a specter that haunts my work. So yeah. Any other questions? Yes, my friend, come on up. You all look so like nice and like bundled up and warm. Like, just hi.
My name is Maya.
Hi, Maya.
My question is, in like, what ways do you feel like your poetry and like writing poetry has impacted the way you've like understood your childhood and like, just like growing up?
Whoa. Okay. The first word that comes to mind is excavation. You know, a couple years ago, I was talking to my sister, and I kind of just said at one point, I was like, "Oh my God, I had a bad childhood," and I was expecting my sister to be like, "Oh no, it was fine. Like you're exaggerating." And my sister looked at me and she said, "Yeah, you did. Yeah, you actually had a horrible childhood." And I had never felt like so affirmed, you know? I was like, oh wow, yeah, that was terrible. And I think the way that I process a lot of my trauma is by making jokes about it and by joking around. And I've horrified a lot of people and over the years, and that's why I said I'm a person of comedy. And I definitely did inherit that from my mother, who is very goofy, is like hilarious and very goofy and very funny, and also insane. And has had like, you know, if I had a bad childhood, my mother's childhood was like 30 times worse. And I recognized one day that, I was like, oh, Mom, you're goofy, because if you actually couldn't laugh about every horrible thing that happened to you, you would probably be dead. And she said, yes, thank you. That is exactly it. And then did her own thing. So I think like at one point in time, I did want to be a comedian. And I was strongly dissuaded to do that by my family. They still make fun of me for this. And I think like poetry is a way that I have infused with my humor, but I don't think a lot of people recognize that I'm actually like pretty funny in my poems. And I think like a lot, like tonight, like I heard no laughs. So you're allowed to laugh when I read. But yeah, does that answer your question? Cool, okay. All right, any other questions? Oh, yeah, come on up. Right, yeah.
I was wondering, like, if your family reads your work, and if so, like, have you talked to them about it? What do they think about it? Like, their opinions, and how it makes you feel?
I don't know. Yeah, so my mom's side of the family is Nicaragüense, and Nicaragua is known as like a country of poets, has like a really strong legacy of that. Every family has a poet. My family didn't have a poet until I guess I became a poet. So on the one hand, my family is like really proud of me, and they're really proud to have a poet in the family finally. On the other hand, they've never said anything to me about my actual poetry. I know that my mom has a copy of The Easy Body that she tore the last page out of because it says something that would quite possibly bring shame to our family, I suppose. But I actually don't know if they do. They know I'm a poet, and they know that I do things, and every once in a while someone will say something and they're actually like very protective of my work and of me and like the fact that I do that. Unlike a lot of, I think, a lot of immigrant families, and honestly Jewish families for that instance. I was actually saying earlier, like, my family never wanted me to be like a doctor or a lawyer or anything like that. And at one point I was like, I want to be a scientist. I want to study volcanoes. And everyone was like, no, absolutely not. You're crazy. They've always just kind of let me be an artist. So yeah. Cool. All right. If no one has any more questions.
Can you tell us about the band?
The
'Cause
band.
we gotta go home and listen to the music you were telling us. You're ashamed of all of us for not knowing this music.
Oh yeah, Throbbing Gristle is really cool. I'm actually, so I do listen to a lot of music. I know, stop. Sorry. So Dickie is like one of my best friends. He's a very talented filmmaker and photographer, and is probably gonna roast me really hard tonight after this. So I'm a really big fan of industrial music, and Throbbing Gristle is really cool. Now I'm like feeling all self-conscious because I'm gonna give like an exegesis on Throbbing Gristle. If you have to listen to one album, I think their most accessible one is probably 20 Great Jazz Hits. Jazz Great Hits, thanks. Which I have on a tape that is unlabeled, which is why I don't know the name of the album. But I think, yeah, that's probably like the most accessible one. And you'll see it and you'll think you'll be like, oh yeah, this looks great and it's gonna be fun and it's gonna be like Muzak. But yeah, it's really good. Yeah. Anyway.
I got a couple other questions.
Okay, go for it.
So some of the students here are in a class called Social Justice, Activism, and Jews, and without boxing you in to the term activist or even what your understanding of social justice is, I'm sure you have some sense of what those terms, activist and social justice, mean to you, and
Yeah.
in what way do you think your art is part of how you are trying to change the world as it is into what it could be?
Wow. Okay. So I don't identify as an activist. I should probably say that. I largely don't identify as an activist because I think that sort of is, how do I put this? Kind of like an anointing. And I think especially nowadays, it's become something that's so deeply professionalized. And I'm like vehemently opposed to that. I don't know, I've actually been thinking about this a lot today. Because of what happened in Los Angeles with like the Los Angeles City Council. And I grew up in Los Angeles, and I grew up actually knowing two of the city council people, one of whom, when I was, I don't know, how old are y'all? Like 19, 20 or something. When I was 20, I was organizing with Los Angeles City College students, towards getting undocumented, like we were organizing for DACA, right? So this was in a pre-DACA world. And we occupied a part of the Los Angeles City Council chambers, Kevin DeLeon's office. And he told us that he didn't care about undocumented students because they couldn't vote for him. And I remember going home like really angry and not knowing how to even like deal with that kind of like, just like almost like cheerful abjection in like a way. And I didn't know what to do. And, you know, so much of the music and artists and writers that I love were either like deeply political in their practices, but like explicitly so, you know, and I am not somebody who's like, I'm not explicit. I often speak really cryptically, I love metaphor. I love correspondence. And I felt like, okay, like I could like, start like a punk band and like start screaming about Kevin DeLeon, but like that wouldn't do anything, right? So I remember like really struggling with that for years. And I do feel like my work is deeply political, but I'm not sure how. And I do struggle with that by not being explicit. Because so much of my work is born out of reading and being a student of history and engaging with history. And like all of you, a result of history. And, there are things in my work, in the poems that I read tonight, like addressing, yes, colonization, yes, like massacres, yes, like, the process of reorganization in Argentina, the dirty war. But it's like, I sometimes am like, do people see that that's what that's about? And I do feel that by doing that with my work, however, I'm hoping that people read it and engage with it and kind of investigate into it, I suppose. A poet that I deeply admire and I'm very proud to call my friend, Wendy Trevino, writes poems that are like exquisite, like they're exquisitely brief and articulate, but also very explicit about what she's talking about. And she makes fantastic allusions and fantastic connections to other things. And I wish I could write like that. And I've seen Wendy's work like transform people politically and like a light in their heads. And I don't know if my work does that. So I kind of feel like I'm a failure in that regard. Yeah. Okay. Do you have another question, Aaron? Okay.
Don't be shy.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Moss, and I have.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Moss, and I have a question that does not quite relate. It kind of does, kind of doesn't. How would you describe your gender and how that really, like, if you had to do an in-depth thing on your gender and your relationship to gender and how that impacts your work?
Ooh, okay. I also really like your tennis shoes, by the way. Yeah. I used to identify pretty explicitly as like a trans-masculine, non-binary person. And I realized that it confused a lot of people because of the way that I present, which is like pretty high femme. And I stopped identifying as that because I just stopped wanting to have conversations around it. And it was also around the time that I cut my hair. And I remember cutting my hair and getting all these compliments, and it was a pretty great haircut, I'm not gonna lie. I did it myself. I looked pretty good. But I felt like almost sick to my stomach because I felt like I had like mutilated myself. And I remember being like really upset and thinking like, no, this is right. Like I'm doing the right thing by doing this, and now people will understand. And I talked to my mom about it, and my mom was like, yeah, she's like, I understand why you would think that, but you're thinking within a very, very specific context of masculinity. And she was like, I think you really need to take into consideration like who you really are. Which to hear from your mom is like really scary. So I did. And my mom, I will say, I'm very lucky, like I'm almost like about to cry. I'm very lucky because if it wasn't for her, I feel like I would still be like trying to force myself into like a very US centric, very colonial idea of gender. And my mom was the one who made it very clear to me that, like, you know, I mean, there's like hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of like indigenous nations across Turtle Island, and they all have their own relation to gender. They all have their own relation to sexuality. And my mom was like really helpful in like helping me identify like our own like people's relationships and like helping me identify like where I fit into that. And like I mentioned before, I do kind of identify as sort of like a trickster poet. And I kind of feel that way about my gender a little bit too. You know, I swear to God, if I am in the hospital dying, I want one of you to come in and make sure I'm wearing lipstick. Like, do not let me die without lipstick on. But is lipstick necessarily feminine or masculine? You know, it's like capitalism that tells us that it's so, right? That it's this object that is assigned to this very particular thing. And how gender in the United States and in the Western world and everywhere now because of globalization is like deeply connected to capitalism and the performance of gender. So to answer your question, I don't have a word for my gender identity. And I use they, them pronouns because in this language and in this country and in this culture, which I am a part of, it's the closest thing that I can really identify. And sometimes I'm a boy and sometimes I'm a girl. And yeah, I hope that answers your question. Cool. Sorry that I keep like, it's like kind of warm from the electricity, so it's like keeping my hands warm. Any other questions or comments or requests, grievances, gossip? All right. Do you want to ask another one, or are we good? Yeah, we're all cold. But thank you so much, everyone. It's been really wonderful. Get home, get warm.
Thank you very much, Tatiana.